The glass shattered before anyone heard it fall. That was the thing about power. It broke quietly. Invisibly. Until the damage was already done. Marcus Devereux had built an empire on assumptions. The first assumption was that language worked like territory, you controlled it or you didn't. The second was that people who served food did not speak Arabic. Both assumptions were about to cost him everything. The restaurant sat high above Midtown Manhattan, suspended between the noise of the street and the silence of wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a painting that belonged to whoever could afford the table. Tonight, 6 people sat in the corner. 5 believed the room was theirs. 1 knew better. The waitress moved between tables with the kind of precision that made people forget she was there. Her uniform was pressed sharp. Her steps were measured. Her name tag, Amara, sat near her collar, unnoticed by everyone who mattered. She had learned long ago that invisibility was a survival skill. But invisibility could also be a weapon. Marcus leaned back in his chair, scanning the table with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. His voice carried easily over the low hum of conversation. Deals were made here. Fortunes shifted. Entire companies changed hands over dessert. He was used to rooms bending around him. Tonight would be different. Amara approached the table, carrying a tray of wine glasses balanced perfectly on one hand. She set them down without a sound, her movements controlled, deliberate. Marcus barely looked at her. That was his first mistake. He spoke in Arabic. Quietly. Casually. The way people do when they think no one important is listening. It was not profanity. That would have been too obvious. It was worse. A comment about competence. About people who were useful until they weren't. About how someone in her position should know their place. The words floated into the air, meant to disappear. They didn't. Amara froze. Not in fear. In calculation. The moment stretched. Half a second. Maybe less. Then she responded. In Arabic. Fluent. Controlled. Precise. She corrected him. Gently. Clearly. With the kind of calm that only comes from knowing exactly what you are doing. The table went silent. Not the kind of silence that follows a joke. The kind that follows a miscalculation. Marcus's hand stopped halfway to his glass. His jaw tightened. Across from him, Daniel Okonkwo, an international partner who had flown in from Lagos, raised an eyebrow. No one laughed. No one moved. Because shock does not announce itself. It arrives quietly. And it changes everything. Amara stood perfectly still, her expression unchanged. She did not smile. She did not apologize. She simply waited. Marcus cleared his throat. I see, he said in English. Flat. Professional. Already trying to erase what had just happened. Will there be anything else? Amara asked. No. That will be all. She turned and walked away. Her stride did not quicken. Her shoulders did not drop. She moved the same way she had all night. Except now, everyone at the table had seen her. For the first time. And Marcus Devereux, who had spent 30 years building an empire on the belief that he understood every room he entered, realized he had just made a mistake he could not take back. If you want to see what happens when power gets exposed by a single sentence, subscribe and turn on notifications. The next chapter reveals who Amara really is, and why that moment just cost Marcus more than he knows. The restaurant existed in a space where gravity worked differently. Not physically. Economically. Up here, 23 floors above the street, the air felt thinner. The light softer. The noise filtered down to something almost like silence. This was intentional. Places like this were not built for eating. They were built for decisions. The kind that required distance. From the public. From scrutiny. From consequences. The reservation had been made 3 weeks in advance. Not under a name anyone would recognize. Under a Delaware holding company that existed only on paper. The kind of entity that moved money quietly and left no fingerprints. 6 people sat at the corner table. 3 were lawyers. 1 was an accountant. 1 was an international partner. And 1 was Marcus Devereux. The lawyers wore suits that cost more than most people made in a month. The accountant wore glasses and said almost nothing. The international partner, Daniel Okonkwo, wore a calm expression that gave away nothing. Marcus wore confidence like a second skin. He had arrived 10 minutes late. Not because he was delayed. Because he could. The table had been chosen carefully. Corner position. Clear sight lines. Privacy without isolation. From here, Marcus could see everyone who entered. Could gauge the room. Could control the rhythm of the evening. Or so he thought. The deal on the table was straightforward. A partnership. A merger of infrastructure and capital. Marcus brought the access. Daniel brought the execution. Together, they could move into 3 West African markets that had been locked to outsiders for years. The numbers were clean. The terms were fair. The lawyers had already drafted the framework. All that remained was trust. And trust, in rooms like this, was performed. It was performed through tone. Through posture. Through how you treated people who could not push back. Marcus had performed trust 1,000 times. He knew the script. Be generous with compliments. Ask thoughtful questions. Show respect for culture, for history, for the complexities of doing business across borders. But beneath that performance, assumptions lived. Assumptions about who mattered. About who understood. About who needed to be impressed and who could be ignored. Tonight, one of those assumptions was about to break. The waitress had been assigned to their section an hour before service began. Amara. 27. Efficient. Polite. Unremarkable. That was what the floor manager had said when he reviewed the seating chart. Table 12 gets Amara. She's solid. Won't bother them. He meant it as a compliment. But solid was not the same as simple. And unbothered was not the same as unaware. Amara had been working at the restaurant for 8 months. She knew the rhythm. She knew which tables wanted conversation and which wanted silence. She knew how to read a room in 3 seconds and adjust accordingly. She also knew how to disappear. That was the skill that mattered most. People with money did not want to see you. They wanted to see the result of your work. The full glass. The cleared plate. The problem that vanished before they noticed it existed. Amara had perfected that disappearance. But disappearance was a choice. And tonight, she was about to stop choosing it. The evening began smoothly. Drinks arrived on time. Appetizers were plated with precision. Conversation at the table flowed easily, punctuated by occasional laughter. Marcus was in his element. Charming. Commanding. Telling a story about a deal he had closed in Singapore 5 years ago. The kind of story that sounded humble but was designed to impress. Daniel listened politely. He smiled at the right moments. Asked a clarifying question that suggested he was paying attention. But his eyes were sharper than his smile. Amara noticed. She noticed a lot of things. The way Marcus interrupted the lawyers mid-sentence. The way he touched Daniel's shoulder when making a point, casual, familiar, assuming permission that had not been given. The way he spoke just a little louder than necessary, as if volume equaled authority. She noticed the way Daniel's jaw tightened slightly when Marcus used the phrase, over there, to describe Lagos. Small things. The kind of things most people missed. But Amara had been trained to see them. Not here. Not in this job. Somewhere else. Somewhere that felt like a lifetime ago but was only 3 years behind her. She refilled the water glasses and stepped back. The main course arrived. Marcus cut into his steak and nodded approvingly. Perfectly done. Amara inclined her head slightly. I'll let the kitchen know. She turned to leave. That was when he said it. Quietly. In Arabic. Directed at no one in particular. A sentence about her. About people like her. About how they did their jobs well enough but lacked the capacity for anything more. It was not shouted. It was not meant to wound. It was just, casual. Reflexive. The kind of thing people say when they believe the room is theirs and no one will challenge them. Amara stopped. Her back was still turned. Her hands were steady. But something inside her shifted. She had spent 8 months being invisible. 8 months swallowing comments. 8 months pretending she did not hear the things people said when they thought she could not understand. Tonight, she was done pretending. She turned around. And she spoke. Want to see what happens when Amara finally responds, and how one fluent sentence changes everything? Subscribe and turn on notifications. Chapter 3 drops the bomb that Marcus never saw coming. Amara had learned to move like water. Not fast. Not slow. Just inevitable. She had learned it in a place where mistakes were visible and visibility was dangerous. Where every gesture mattered. Where the wrong tone could cost you more than a shift. She had learned it at Georgetown. Not in the glossy brochures. Not in the lectures that tourists watched from the back of the room. In the program nobody talked about. The one buried on the 3rd floor of a building with no windows. The one that trained people to work in places where being American was a liability and being fluent was survival. She had spent 2 years in that program. 6 hours a day. Immersive. Exhausting. Learning Arabic the way surgeons learned anatomy, by repetition, by pressure, by understanding that mistakes had consequences. She had also learned contract law. International economics. Negotiation theory. Not because she wanted a career in diplomacy. Because she needed an exit. From debt. From limitation. From the suffocating weight of being smart in a world that only rewarded smart when it came with the right last name or the right connections. She had graduated with honors. And $63,000 in debt. The market had collapsed 2 months before graduation. Hiring freezes swept through every sector she had trained for. Positions vanished. Interviews were cancelled. Offers were rescinded. She had sent out 200 applications. 12 responses. 3 interviews. 0 jobs. So she did what people do when the math stops working. She took what was available. A contact, someone she had met during an internship, had called her on a Tuesday afternoon. I know this isn't what you wanted. But it pays. And it puts you in rooms where things happen. She had hesitated. I didn't go to Georgetown to wait tables. No. You went to survive. This is how you do that. So she took the job. And she learned a different skill. Invisibility. Not the kind that came from being ignored. The kind that came from choosing when to be seen. Tonight, she was choosing. She stood at the edge of table 12, her posture straight, her expression neutral. Marcus had just spoken in Arabic. A casual insult. Reflexive. Meant for no one. But she had heard it. And she understood it. For 8 months, she had let moments like this pass. Had swallowed the comments. Had pretended the words did not land. Tonight was different. She did not raise her voice. She did not lean forward or step closer. She simply responded. In Arabic. Fluent. Precise. Controlled. She corrected his grammar first. Gently. The way a professor might correct a student who had conjugated a verb incorrectly. Then she addressed the content. Not with anger. Not with accusation. With clarity. She pointed out that competence was not determined by position. That intelligence was not visible on a uniform. That assumptions, when spoken aloud, revealed more about the speaker than the subject. She said it all in 3 sentences. Then she stopped. The silence that followed was not empty. It was dense. Heavy. The kind of silence that forms when everyone in the room realizes something has shifted and no one knows how to respond. Marcus's hand froze halfway to his glass. Across from him, Daniel Okonkwo's expression changed. Not dramatically. Just subtly. A slight widening of the eyes. A small shift in posture. Recognition. Not of Amara. Of the language. Of the fluency. Of the fact that someone Marcus had dismissed without a second thought had just spoken to him in a dialect most Americans could not identify, let alone master. Amara did not wait for a response. She inclined her head slightly. Professional. Courteous. Will there be anything else? Marcus blinked. Once. Twice. His mouth opened. Closed. Then he forced a smile. Tight. Controlled. No. That will be all. Amara turned and walked away. Her stride did not change. Her breathing remained even. But inside her chest, her heart was pounding. Not from fear. From the knowledge that she had just done something irreversible. She had revealed herself. And there was no taking it back. Behind her, the table sat in silence. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with an expression that could have been curiosity or judgment. Impressive, he said quietly. Marcus picked up his glass. Set it down again. What is? Her Arabic. Levantine dialect. Very clean. Marcus nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He was replaying the moment. Searching for the mistake. For the point where control had slipped. He did not find it. Because the mistake had not been in what he said. It had been in who he assumed was listening. And assumptions, once broken, do not repair themselves. They collapse. And everything built on top of them collapses too. Want to know what happens when Marcus realizes the waitress wasn't random, and that someone's been watching him the whole time? Subscribe and turn on notifications. The next chapter reveals the plan he never saw coming. Marcus Devereux had never been corrected. Not publicly. Not in a room that mattered. Not by someone whose name he did not know. Criticism, when it came, arrived softly. Wrapped in compliments. Delivered by people who needed something from him and knew better than to bite the hand that signed checks. He had built his career on decisiveness. Not intelligence, decisiveness. There was a difference. Intelligence required reflection. Consideration. The willingness to admit you might be wrong. Decisiveness just required speed. Move faster than the person next to you. Speak louder. Interrupt without hesitation. Fill the silence before someone else could claim it. People mistook that for brilliance. They mistook momentum for vision. And Marcus had never bothered to correct them. His wealth was old enough to feel inevitable. Not inherited, his father had been a pastor, his mother a schoolteacher, but adjacent to inheritance. Early access. Early networks. Early forgiveness when mistakes were made. He had gone to the right schools. Not because of grades, but because someone had made a phone call. He had landed the right internship. Not because of his resume, but because his roommate's uncle sat on the board. Failure, when it happened, never stayed long enough to scar. There was always another opportunity. Another door that opened just as the previous one closed. He had learned early that the world bent for people who acted like they belonged. So he acted. And the world bent. Until tonight. Tonight, something had resisted. Not loudly. Not aggressively. Just quietly. Firmly. In a way that left no room for negotiation. Marcus sat at the head of the table, his steak cooling in front of him. The conversation had resumed, but it felt forced. Mechanical. Daniel was asking questions about logistics. About timelines. About regulatory frameworks in markets Marcus had promised to navigate. But his tone had changed. Subtle. Almost imperceptible. But Marcus heard it. The shift from partnership to evaluation. From collaboration to judgment. He had heard that shift before. In rooms where deals died slowly. Where confidence eroded one question at a time until nothing remained but polite excuses and vague promises to reconnect. He forced himself to focus. To answer clearly. To project the same certainty he always did. But his mind kept circling back. To the waitress. To the sentence he had spoken in Arabic. To the response he had not expected. He replayed it again. Searching for the mistake. Not in what he had said, that had been harmless. A throwaway comment. The kind of thing people said all the time in rooms like this. The mistake had been in assuming no one would understand. And that assumption had just exposed something he could not afford to have exposed. Not cruelty. Not malice. Carelessness. The belief that certain people did not matter enough to require caution. And Daniel had noticed. Marcus reached for his wine glass. His hand was steady. But inside, something had shifted. Not panic. Not fear. Just the uncomfortable awareness that he had misjudged the room. And in his world, misjudgment was the first step toward irrelevance. Want to see what happens when the consequences start piling up, and Marcus realizes the waitress was just the beginning? Subscribe and turn on notifications. Chapter 5 reveals the insult that started it all. The food arrived at 8:47 p.m. Plates arranged with precision. Steam rising in delicate curls. Aromas designed to disarm, rosemary, butter, something citrus and sharp. Amara set the last dish down in front of Marcus. Her movements were exact. Controlled. The result of 8 months learning how to serve people who expected perfection without acknowledgement. She stepped back. There was a pause. Small. Barely noticeable. Marcus leaned back in his chair, scanning the table. His eyes moved across the food, the wine glasses, the faces of the people sitting with him. Then his gaze flicked toward Amara. Not at her face. At her presence. The way someone might glance at a chair that had been moved slightly out of place. He picked up his knife. Cut into the steak. Nodded to himself. Then he spoke. Quietly. In Arabic. With the kind of relaxed confidence that came from certainty. Certainty that no one else at the table belonged to the language. Certainty that the words would float into the air and disappear. The sentence was not profanity. That would have been crude. Obvious. This was worse. A comment about competence. About people who performed tasks adequately but lacked depth. About how individuals in positions like hers were useful, necessary, even, but fundamentally limited. Replaceable. The words were directed at no one. Spoken into the space between bites of food and sips of wine. A sentence meant to bond the powerful. A sentence meant to remind everyone at the table that they occupied a different world than the person standing 3 feet away. A sentence designed to disappear. It didn't. Amara stood perfectly still. Her hands remained at her sides. Her posture did not shift. But something inside her crystallized. For 8 months, she had absorbed comments like this. In English. In tones that barely registered as insults because they were delivered with smiles. She had let them pass. Because survival required swallowing. Because pushing back meant consequences she could not afford. Because invisibility was safer than confrontation. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was the debt. The weight of it pressing against her ribs every time she checked her account balance. Maybe it was the exhaustion. The grind of pretending that intelligence did not exist beneath the uniform. Maybe it was just the sentence itself. The casual cruelty of it. The assumption embedded in every syllable. Whatever it was, something shifted. Amara took a breath. Not deep. Not dramatic. Just enough to steady herself. Then she turned. Not quickly. Not defensively. She turned the way someone does when they have decided to stop pretending. And she spoke. In Arabic. Not rehearsed. Not stilted. Fluent. Her voice was calm. Even. The tone of someone correcting a small misunderstanding rather than confronting an insult. She addressed the grammar first. Gently. A verb conjugated incorrectly. A tense that did not match the context. Then she moved to the substance. She did not argue. Did not accuse. She clarified. She pointed out that competence was not determined by position. That capacity was not visible on a resume or a name tag. That assumptions, when voiced aloud, often revealed more about the speaker than the subject. 3 sentences. Precise. Controlled. Impossible to misunderstand. Then she stopped. The silence that followed was not loud. It was absolute. Marcus's glass hovered inches from his lips. Across the table, one of the lawyers stiffened. Another looked down, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on their plate. Daniel Okonkwo blinked slowly. His expression shifted, just barely, from polite attention to sharp focus. No one laughed. No one coughed. No one reached for their phone or made a joke to break the tension. Because shock does not announce itself. It paralyzes. And everyone at the table had just realized the same thing. The waitress had understood. And she had responded. In a language most of them could not speak. With a fluency none of them had expected. Amara stood perfectly still, waiting. Her breathing was steady. Her hands relaxed. She looked like someone who had just answered a question. Not someone who had just detonated a bomb. Marcus set his glass down. Carefully. Slowly. He forced a smile. Professional. Controlled. I see. Amara inclined her head slightly. Will there be anything else? The words were polite. Courteous. But underneath them was something else. A boundary. A line that had just been drawn. Marcus cleared his throat. No. That will be all. Amara turned and walked away. Her stride did not quicken. Her shoulders did not drop. She moved the same way she had all night. But everything had changed. And Marcus Devereux, who had spent 3 decades believing he understood power, had just learned something he would spend the next week trying to unlearn. Power was not about who spoke loudest. It was about who understood the room. And tonight, he had misunderstood it completely. Want to see the exact moment Marcus realizes he just made the biggest mistake of his career? Subscribe and turn on notifications. Chapter 6 is the collision you've been waiting for. The glass stopped halfway to his lips. Not dropped. Not slammed down. Just frozen, suspended in the air like time itself had miscalculated. Across the table, Marcus Devereux had been mid-sentence about quarterly projections when the sound hit him. Not English. Not the language he expected from someone whose job was to refill water and disappear. Arabic. Clean. Precise. Unhurried. The waitress, Amara, had not raised her voice. She had not stepped back or leaned forward. Her hands remained at her sides, fingers loose, posture unchanged. But the words she spoke carved through the air with surgical accuracy. She had corrected him. Not loudly. Not rudely. She had simply clarified what he had said, and then, in 3 additional words, dismantled the assumption beneath it. The assumption that no one here would understand. Marcus blinked. Once. Twice. His jaw tightened, but his mouth stayed closed. Around him, 5 other faces had turned to stone. No one laughed. No one coughed. No one reached for their phone or pretended to check a message. Because shock does not announce itself with noise. It arrives in silence. Heavy. Absolute. Amara stood perfectly still. She did not smile. She did not apologize. She did not offer an explanation. Her eyes remained level, focused on the middle distance just past his shoulder, the exact place service staff are trained to look when addressing someone without challenging them. But everything had already changed. Marcus set the glass down. Slowly. Carefully. The kind of controlled movement people use when they realize they have miscalculated badly and need time to recalibrate. He cleared his throat. I see, he said in English. Flat. Professional. The tone of someone trying to erase the last 30 seconds from existence. Amara inclined her head slightly. Not a bow. Just acknowledgement. Will there be anything else? She asked. Her English was flawless too. No accent. No hesitation. No. The word came out sharper than he intended. That will be all. She turned and walked toward the kitchen. Her stride did not quicken. Her shoulders did not hunch. She moved the same way she had all evening, calm, controlled, invisible. Except now, everyone at the table had seen her. For the first time. Marcus picked up his fork. Set it down again. Across from him, Daniel Okonkwo, the international partner who had flown in from Lagos for this meeting, was watching him with an expression that could have been curiosity or judgment. It was hard to tell. Impressive, Daniel said quietly. Marcus forced a smile. What is? Her Arabic. Levantine dialect, if I'm not mistaken. Very clean. Marcus nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He was replaying the moment, searching for where control had slipped. Not just slipped, been taken. The conversation resumed. Slowly. Awkwardly. But the rhythm had been broken. And rhythm, once broken, does not return on command. Outside the main dining room, Amara pushed through the swinging door into the kitchen. The noise hit her immediately, clattering pans, running water, voices overlapping in Spanish and English. She moved to the service station and set down the empty tray. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was even. But inside her chest, her heart was pounding. Not from fear. From calculation. She had just done something irreversible. Something that could not be walked back or explained away. She had revealed a piece of herself that was supposed to stay hidden. And now she would pay for it. The question was how much? Amara. The voice came from behind her. Low. Clipped. She turned. Gerald, the floor manager, stood in the doorway. His face was neutral, but his posture was not. Arms crossed. Weight shifted slightly forward. The body language of someone about to deliver bad news and not interested in discussing it. Come with me. She followed him down the narrow hallway past the walk-in freezer, past the office where schedules were posted, into the small break room that smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. He closed the door. What happened out there? Amara met his eyes. A guest spoke to me. I responded. In Arabic. Yes. Gerald exhaled through his nose. He was not angry. He was annoyed. There was a difference. You know how this works, he said. This isn't about right or wrong. It's about keeping things smooth. Comfortable. You made someone uncomfortable. He insulted me. I don't care. The words were not cruel. Just factual. I don't care what he said. I care that a table worth 6 figures just went quiet, and now I have to explain to ownership why their VIP experience got disrupted. Amara said nothing. Gerald uncrossed his arms. Your shift's over. Go home. It's only 9:30. I know what time it is. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then nodded. Understood. She walked past him, grabbed her coat from the locker, and pushed through the back exit into the alley. The cold air hit her face like a slap. She stood there for a moment, letting her eyes adjust to the darkness. Then she started walking. The city was loud tonight. Sirens in the distance. A subway rumbling beneath the street. Voices spilling out of a bar 2 blocks down. Amara kept her head down and her pace steady. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. It buzzed again. She pulled it out. 2 missed calls. Both from the same number. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she answered. Yes. The voice on the other end was calm. Measured. The kind of voice that never raised itself because it never needed to. How did it go? Amara glanced back toward the restaurant, even though she could no longer see it. He took the bait. Good. I'm off the schedule now. Gerald sent me home. Expected. You'll be reinstated by Monday. And if I'm not? You will be. The line went quiet for a moment. Then the voice continued. You did well tonight, Amara. Better than expected. She closed her eyes. He has no idea, does he? None. And the deal? Already unstable. Daniel noticed. That's all we needed. Amara exhaled slowly. What happens next? You wait. And you let him make the next mistake. The call ended. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and kept walking. Behind her, 20 stories above the street, Marcus Devereux was still sitting at the table. The food had gone cold. The conversation had died. And for the first time in 15 years, he had the uncomfortable feeling that he was not the most important person in the room. He just didn't know why yet. If you want to see how Marcus Devereux's empire begins to crumble, and how one sentence in Arabic becomes the thread that unravels everything, subscribe and turn on notifications. The next chapter drops soon, and you won't want to miss what happens when power realizes it's been played.